Choices. Posted by Stephanie. There was something about her that captivated me from the beginning. Maybe it was her eyes, a striking cerulean blue that appeared as deep as the ocean when she looked at me. Or maybe it was her lips, painted a red so dark it could easily be mistaken for blood. Whatever it was, she drew me in. She hardly spoke, but when she did, she made every word count. It was her words that made me fall in love, after all. Every sentence was poetry, flowing easily from those crimson lips like wind that swayed leaves on trees. I always knew she was destined to be a writer, to use the words she seldom spoke but often wrote to leave her mark on the world. Even in the end, when she drew her final breaths, I'd never read a suicide note written so eloquently. I could feel her hand graze the ink on the page, smudging it. Many believed those ink stains were from her tears, but she didn't cry. I'd never seen her cry in my life. But when I read those words, those heartbreaking, earth-shattering words, my own tears flowed freely, dripping onto the notebook paper and mixing the blue lines with her red ink, forming small, purple splotches in the margins and between each word. "I'm sorry," the note began. And that was all it took for me to break down. "I'm sorry for making you read this. But didn't you know it was inevitable? You had to. Every moment, starting from the first time we met, would only lead us here. I couldn't take it. I was always fascinated by her blind belief in destiny, that no one truly had control over their actions. It would help ease some of the blame off each of her wrongdoings. But now, after her death, I couldn't stand such thoughts. Of course we had a choice. She didn't have to end her life. And taking the responsibility away from her actions angered me. She had to know what this would do to me, but maybe her belief in destiny was what led to her demise, so she had no reservations of killing herself, that the repercussions would be at the fault of the universe, or God, or whatever other higher power she believed in. But no. I do believe in fate, don't get me wrong. I believed it was fate that we met, that we fell in love, or at least I did. If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have left. But believing in it to the degree of thinking she had no free will? Well, that was frankly ridiculous. I clenched my teeth, poured a drink, and continued to read. "Do you remember what I told you that first night?" And I did. Of course I did. I'd play it over and over in my mind like a broken record. I remembered what she wore. A black dress with lacy flowers adorning the sleeves and black suede boots that cut off at the ankles. I remembered what she looked like, her blonde curls pinned up in a bun atop her head with a butterfly claw clip, those red lips and blue eyes highlighted by minimal makeup. I remembered the lavender-scented perfume wafting off of her when she leaned in close to speak so she could be heard over the roaring music in the background. I remembered down to the song that was playing when she first introduced herself, though I tried to drown it out. Tears for Fears, everybody wants to rule the world. Ironic, and she did, and I believed she could. But most of all, I remembered what she said. And through my vision blurred by tears, I reread those words. "Isn't it funny how no one here truly cares?" I was confused at first, but then she explained. "I mean, look around. Those girls crowding around the stairwell. How little they'd care if they never spoke to each other again. For they're only here to convince themselves they're having a good time, distracting themselves from their everyday life of bills and mortgage and parents they haven't spoken to in years." I laughed. "What about you then? Do you care?" She'd even included my response, verbatim, in her note. "Of course I care. I'd very much like to speak to you after this party." And so it went, as cliché as a story can go, me falling in love with a girl who claims she's different from everybody else, who lived her life against the grain, defied the status quo. Hell, she boycotted it. But while many may think they're trying to be unique, they end up being like everybody else in their quest to be different. That was the paradox. But her? She truly was different. And no, it wasn't because of my judgment blinded by my utter infatuation with her that I thought that. Everyone she met did. The note continued on. I took another sip, then another. And that was the story of our beginning. You knew that story already, though. But what I'm here to tell you is the story of our end, of my end. I never imagined there would be one. I expected, till death do us part, but not this quickly. There is an old Polaroid I left in my room, slipped between the box spring and the mattress. Wait until you're done reading this, please, but I want you to go and get it, then burn it. This isn't meant to be an instruction manual of what I want you to do after I'm dead, though. To be perfectly candid, I don't very much care. My life is over, isn't it? Who am I to dictate what happens after? I have no more jurisdiction in this plane of existence. But there is one more thing. Beside the Polaroid, there's a tape, you know, a VHS tape. I want you to watch it, then rip out the film and burn it as well. I paused there. This was all starting to feel like one of those procedural cop shows or mystery crime shows she loathed and loved to make fun of. Was this another instance of her irony? Her death ending in a way she would have mocked and predicted the ending to within the first 10 minutes of the episode? My fist crumpled the edges of the paper, my tears now rolling down the paper, smudging the red ink further and having it run in a pool onto my lap like a stream of blood. I turned the page, then smoothed out the wrinkled edges as I tried to compose myself for the sentences to follow. I apologize again for involving you in this. But you see, it had to be this way. There it was again, those words I despised. It had to be this way. No, it didn't. She chose for it to be this way, but of course, choice was non-existent to her. I also asked that this note not be shared with anyone, that once you finish reading it, you burn it with the Polaroid. I want this to stay between you and me, our final little secret. She knew exactly what she was doing, the effect her words would have on me. She knew she had no say in what I did after her death, so she guilted me into cooperating. Another sip of the drink in my hand seeping down my throat, I recalled another memory, the last time she'd said, "Our little secret." We were sitting on her bed in her room, cross-legged, facing one another, passing a family-sized bag of potato chips back and forth and talking. I don't quite remember what about. She had a smile on her face that slowly curled up to a smirk, and she said, "Can I show you something?" I nodded. "Of course. But this has to stay our little secret." "Of course," I repeated, looking into her eyes. She reached behind her, under the mattress, and rummaged around before pulling out a small object lodged between her mattress and box spring. She held it in one hand, covering it with the other, and held her arms in front of me. "Remember, our little secret." She slowly let her hand fall away, revealing the object in her hand. My eyes widened and I shook my head in disbelief. "Why do you have that?" I stammered, my heart beginning to race. "You know, for emergencies." And she gained a devilish glint in her eye, her face still twisted into that satisfied smirk. In the palm of her hand lay 8.22 mm mini revolver. "Okay. Just put that thing back, please." I swallowed hard. "What? You don't want to hold it?" she teased, beginning to twirl the gun around in her hand. "No, thank you. Put it back. It's not loaded, is it?" "Of course it is. What good is a gun if it's not loaded?" She laughed. "You sure you don't want to hold it? There's a certain power that comes with it, you know, holding an object in your hand with the ability to end anyone's life at any moment. Makes me feel like God, personally." She laughed again and aimed the gun at her head. "Stop it!" I shrieked and grabbed her wrist, lowering her hand. "The safety's on, chill out. I'm not an idiot. Sorry. I didn't know it would freak you out so much." She shrugged and slid the revolver back under the mattress, then grabbed a handful of potato chips and shoved them into her mouth. I sighed in relief once the gun was put away and looked at her once again. "When you said you had a secret, I wasn't expecting a gun." "Well, what were you expecting?" she asked, potato chip crumbs stuck to the corners of her mouth. "I don't know, but not that." Our conversation resumed to normal after that, discussing favorite TV shows and movies, mundane small talk. When she spoke, I couldn't help but notice how carefully she chose every word as if speaking for an entire audience instead of just me, or how her hair would fall into her face and she'd meticulously brush it behind her ear. One time, I did it for her, my fingers sliding through her silky blonde curls and my breath caught in my throat, those blue eyes sparkling at me behind hair that I'd brushed aside. Then, she smiled at me and I felt dazed, my heart pounding. She had me captivated, and in that moment, I knew nothing other than the fact that I loved her. That smile, that hair, those eyes, I was overwhelmed by her. So I placed my hand tentatively along the side of her face, my thumb grazing her cheek, and kissed her. There was no hesitation on her part. She wrapped her arms around my waist and pulled me closer and returned the kiss. Out of all my memories of her, that one stuck out the most. I opened my eyes as fresh tears flowed freely from them. I never again kissed those lips. I took another sip, my own lips meeting cold, harsh acidic liquid rather than her soft, gentle face. There was no more sweetness, only a lump in my throat that burned to swallow. But I knew the only thing I could do was to keep reading, finish the last word she'd ever written. Thank you for carrying out my dying wishes, although, you don't really have a choice in this matter, do you? There it was again. There was one final sentence. I had to read it, but a part of me didn't wanted to preserve the last of her I had. I still had the picture and whatever the hell was on that tape, but I didn't want to run out of words. Words, her favorite thing in every form. She could speak forever, write forever, read forever. But now, this final sentence, hardly even, consisting of only 4 more words my tear-blurred vision could hardly decipher, were her last. I love you. C. Taped to the bottom of the letter was a key. I read the words aloud. I love you. But did she? I'd grappled with that long enough. I clutched the note tightly to my chest, tore the key off the paper and grabbed my own car keys, carrying out her final request. The drive wasn't long, but it felt like the longest trip I'd ever taken, my heart racing with every mile I grew closer to her home. And soon, there it was, a gorgeous gray Queen and Victorian with a blue gabled roof, its porch lined with shrubs and rose bushes. I parked out front, and made the journey up the stone sidewalk. I nearly rang the doorbell out of habit, my finger reaching out for it, then pulling back. I took the key she'd left out of my pocket, gripping it tightly in my sweaty palm before pushing it into the lock, and turning. I walked inside, the hardwood floors creaking and groaning under my footsteps. The house was dark, empty, and cold, her absence leaving a void, sucking out all the friendliness in the home. I half expected to find her lounging on the leather couch, her feet kicked up on the armrest, her hand dipped in that giant bag of potato chips we'd shared those months ago. I double-checked to make sure, but of course, it was empty. I ran my palm over the left cushion where she often sat, but that was the coldest of all. I closed my eyes for a moment, fighting back the tears that glistened in my eyes, threatening to fall. I had a job to do. Reminiscing in her home was far too painful, so I'd better get what I'd come for and get the hell out. Turning away from the living room, I started up the stairs to her bedroom at the top of the turret, steeling myself as I knew this room held the most treasured of our memories. The door was left wide open, and I walked inside, flicking on the lights. They flickered for a second before illuminating her room, bathing the home's seemingly perpetual darkness with a blinding light. There were the posters on her walls, of singers that had died before she could see them live and exotic places she'd never be able to visit due to her own death. I took a deep breath when I reached her bed and her room still smelled of her lavender incense candle. Her favorite scent. I thought of her perfume at the party, then pushed the thought to the back of my mind. I smoothed my hand over her blue plush blanket, the one we'd cuddled under during many a cold night, and pulled it back. I reached under the mattress, and my hand curled around cold metal. I winced. It was the gun. I continued my blind search until my Fingers brushed a glossy piece of paper, the Polaroid. And below it, a grooved rectangle, the tape. I pulled them both out, but left the gun concealed. It was still our secret, wasn't it? And the thought of having to see it again made my stomach lurch. I grabbed the items, clutching them to my chest, and ran down the stairs 2 at a time, ready to leave and never again step foot in this house haunted by painful memories. But I couldn't leave just yet, I realized. She was the only person I knew who still had a VHS player in her home. Of course, she knew that. I switched on the TV in her living room, popped in the tape, then sat back on the leather couch, wringing my hands. I hadn't dared glance at the Polaroid yet. Whatever was on it, I was too afraid to see. I slid it under the cushion to remove the temptation of looking at it, and squinted at the screen. The quality was grainy, multicolored vertical lines flashing intermittently across the picture, like an old found footage film. I laughed. That was yet another cliché she hated. But my expression turned serious when the movie came into focus. It was the 2 of us sitting on her bed, cross-legged, and facing each other. Tears were streaming down her face, and I could hear her muffled sobs as she fiddled with the item in her hands, then shoved it into mine. I couldn't see my face, but I knew it was me. My own hands began to tremble, both in the movie and reality. I heard my own sobs mixed with hers. "Do it!" she shrieked, toggling the safety of the gun. "No," I protested, shaking my head vigorously. "You don't have a choice. You never had a choice." "Yes, I do. We both do. Christina, please," I begged. "No." She reached under pillow and pulled out a translucent orange bottle, shook out some of the contents, and shoved them into my mouth, forcing me to swallow. "Sorry," she whispered, "but it had to be this way." She grabbed my hand, which appeared limp, though it was hard to tell through the poor quality, and pressed my index finger against the trigger. The screen then cut out, which I was relieved for, certain I could no longer bear to watch. But in the darkness, a loud bang rang out, a sharp, piercing sound that reminded me of fireworks, but I knew it wasn't. Then, the volume cut out as well. I gulped and slowly stood, steadying myself by grasping the armrest of the couch, and pulled the Polaroid out from under the cushion. I held it up to the light, and nearly fainted from the developed image. I squinted at the label on the bright orange bottle that encompassed the photo. Flunitrazepam. There was one word printed below the image. Run. And as the sirens blared outside the window, bathing the room in a red and blue glow, I knew I had to. What I still didn't understand, though, was why. Why she had made me do this. I knew she was depressed, but why would she put my finger on the trigger? Was it somewhere in her twisted beliefs of life and death that she couldn't commit suicide? I had to be quick. I knew I was running out of time. I ejected the tape and grabbed it, running back up to her room where I took the Bic lighter from her nightstand and scrambled out to the back entrance of her house. My heart pounding, I dropped the lighter onto the picture, then ripped the film out of the tape as instructed. But something caught my eye. A scrap of paper fell from the tape, and I snatched it out of the air before it could fall into the flame. "This time you do have a choice," it read in her elegant cursive writing using the same red pen. Taped to the note was a single bullet. "My name is Lily Madwip and I'm having a picnic." Posted by Lillian Madwip. "Pass the potato chips, please, Lily." That's my brother Roger. He's 6 years older than me. We both like potato chips. Who doesn't? Even my pet turtle Raphael likes them. Raphael is sitting on the tablecloth next to me. He's so cute. I give him a potato chip and pass the bag to Roger. Raphael chomps on the potato chip. "Thank you, Lily." Roger smiles at me. "You're welcome," I tell him and smile back, popping a potato chip in my mouth. It tastes like sawdust. My mom and dad smile at both of us, because they're so happy we're their kids. Roger plays in a band with his friends Skeeter and Dustin. Roger plays the drums. He's very good at it. My dad taught him how. Someday I hope he'll teach me too. We're having a wonderful picnic here by the lake. I can hear birds chirping in the trees. They sound so pretty. Out in the lake, my cousin Susie is swimming around. She loves to swim. She leaves a trail of red behind her in the water. Maybe after we eat Roger and I can play in the lake with Susie. I love you guys, I tell my family. And you, Raphael? I pet my turtle. He turns and looks up at me and lets water pour out of his mouth. He's so silly. And we love you too, Lily. My mom pets my head. I like it when she pets my head. Back in 3rd grade, this lady used to come by our classroom and we were always told to get out our pencils when she came by. We'd set our pencils out on our desks, and the lady would come to each of us and use our pencil to comb through our hair. I always loved it when the lady would comb through my hair with my pencil. I told my mom about the nice lady who would visit our classroom and gently comb our hair, and she told me it was the school nurse and she was checking for lice. Roger nudges me. He's got on his favorite shirt with no sleeves, and his hair is brushed all neat and tidy. He grins at me. Look what I found. He hands me my foil Charizard. Hey, that's mine! Susie calls from down in the lake. She waves at us, but she's got no hand. We all laugh and wave back. Dad stands up and brushes himself off. He's wearing a nice black suit and tie. It must be pretty hot for this sunny summer day. Roger, he says, let's play some music for the ladies. Sounds good, Roger says. He hops to his feet. His belly sloshes because everything inside is mashed potatoes. There's a drum set out on the grass under a big willow tree, and Roger sits down and pulls out his drumsticks. He pours out the snare drum and gives it a tap. My dad pulls out a harmonica and polishes it on his sleeve. Pardon me, may I join you? Mom and I turn to see a dapper-looking man in a white shirt with a painted-on tie. He's got on black pants and a black vest. He looks very happy, and he bows to us both. My jaw drops. Pachar, is that you? He winks at me. It's time to wake up, Lily. No. Dad and Roger start playing a song, but it doesn't sound like music. Dad blows into the harmonica, and it makes a sound like a siren. Roger strikes the drums, and it sounds like crashing and things breaking. It's not a very good song, but it sounds typical for what Roger used to play when Skeeter and Ditton were over. Out in the lake, Susie is screaming and headbanging to the bad music. Her head kind of bends further back than normal, so she really whips her hair around. I imagine if she had hands, she'd be doing devil horns or something. That's where you put your index and pinky fingers up and hold your middle and ring fingers down with your thumb. Roger used to love to do devil horns while rocking out. Oh dear, Mom says and stands up, walking over to the barbecue grill. Something's burning. Black smoke is coming off the grill and forming dark clouds in the sky. I can smell the hot dogs and hamburgers burning, and it's upsetting because I really wanted a hamburger, but not if they're burned. Get them out of there! I yell to Mom. She turns and looks at me, and her face is all waxy looking and melting. I can still see her mouth and her teeth, but her eyes and her nose are sliding right off her face. It's too late, Lily, she says. Everything's burned. Pachar puts his hand on my shoulder. I warned you, he says sadly. But I'm not dead, I tell him. The sky is getting dark with the smoke from the grill. Out in the lake, Susie sinks below the surface of the water and leaves nothing but a big red spot where she was. Dad and Roger stop playing the bad song. Dad watches as Mom melts by the barbecue grill, and then looks at me and shakes his head as he starts to melt too. This is all your fault. I open my eyes. I'm lying on the floor of Meredith's bedroom. Everything's smoky, but I can see some off-white stickers on the ceiling that look like stars and planets and comets. I bet they're glow in the dark. I wish the lights were out so I could see them glow. It's really hot in here. I glance around and realize the room is on fire. That's not good. How long was I out for? The picnic didn't seem, well, okay. The picnic seemed to last about an hour. The wallpaper has flames coming out of it, and even the bed is burning. Nobody's going to be sleeping on that now. There's a crash from somewhere close by, and then the sound of someone struggling. Meredith? I say. Oh my God, I can speak. Lily. I hear her, but she sounds tired. It has definitely been a long day for both of us. I can't even remember what I had for breakfast. No, wait, I had frosted flakes. That's right. Lily, I burned her. I burned her right up. I didn't mean to do it. She must be referring to Officer Flowers, the lady in black, the policewoman who carries a totem of Duma, the angel of death and silence. She has been popping up all over the place lately. First the mall, then school. Now she showed up at Meredith's house in the middle of Meredith and Felix making their grand escape. Wait, where is Felix? Where's Felix? I ask. It hurts to talk, and I start coughing. So smoky in here. We need to get out before we burn up. I don't feel anything. Of course she doesn't. Meredith's fires don't hurt her. Somebody just needs to teach her how to put them out. There's going to be an assembly on fire safety if I recall. Heck, they could have Meredith help teach it. I sit up. Meredith is curled up in a corner, hiding her face. She's sobbing and holding herself and rocking back and forth. Between us there's a person, curled up as well, only they're kind of on fire and not moving. Oh Jesus! I can't tell who they are because they're all black and like I said on fire, but it must be poor Officer Flowers. She smells like burned hamburgers. We gotta get out of here, Meredith. I choke on the smoke. I'm in a lot of pain. And your house is on fire. Are those glow-in-the-dark stickers on your ceiling? Just leave me. Somebody moves in the doorway to the hall. I turn to look. It's Roger. He's wearing his sleeveless shirt and his hair is combed like at his funeral. Just leave her, ass face, he says. He walks off down the hall. Oh great, I'm hallucinating. I grab Pochar and Nathaniel off the bed. Scooting past the bad-smelling, burned-up body, I crawl over to Meredith and hold out Nathaniel. Nathaniel says we all need to leave. She takes her melted Barbie and hugs him to her chest. Outside, I can hear fire engine sirens. I wait, looking at her. Come on, Meredith, snap out of it. She looks back at me, tears in both her eyes. I still wonder if she can see me with that milky one. Now that Felix is gone, I can think more clearly. I whisper. He gets in your head. He makes you think things, and say things. He makes you tell your secrets. Meredith mutters. Something big falls over downstairs with a crash. It sounds like Roger banging on his drums, but those are back at the picnic. No, wait, that was a dream. His drums are in our garage. I grab Meredith by the shoulders. Meredith, I'm not afraid of sharks. She tilts her head like a dog when you tell it to fetch and don't throw a stick. It's the universal sign for, huh? What does that have to do with anything? Don't you remember? I told you I was afraid of sharks. So what? Felix made me say it. Don't you get it? He told me to tell you what I'm scared of, and I said I was scared of sharks. Even in my head, I was thinking suddenly about how scary sharks are. But sharks are out in the ocean. I'm not scared of them. Or clowns. Well, okay, I'm unnerved by clowns. But I wasn't scared of them until Felix made me confess. So you lied? Oh God, the smell of the person on the floor mixed with the pain in my side is starting to make me sick. Can we discuss this outside, please? I don't want to die. Meredith nods silently. She looks at the dead person smoldering on the floor, then looks away and follows me as I head to the door. Just as we approach the hall, a big man in a yellow fireman's jacket and yellow fireman's pants and yellow helmet walks in. He stares at us, then past us at the burned body, then back at us. Girls, stay low. I'll get you out of here. Just give me a second. Are you real? I ask him. Yes, I'm real, he says. Okay then. He goes down the hall and comes back with a sopping wet blanket which he makes Meredith and I wrap around us. Less than a minute later, we're breathing fresh air out on the front lawn, being given oxygen through some cool-looking rubber mask while each wearing a less wet blanket. The firemen managed to put out the fire without too much more of the house getting damaged, but there's still the matter of the dead body inside. Meredith and I get to ride in an ambulance to the hospital so they can take care of whatever's going on that's hurting so much in my side after the car crash. I wish it was a helicopter, but there's no room for one to land. Meredith, I say to her while the ambulance bumps along. I don't think you're ugly and you don't scare me. She looks at me doubtfully. You're one of my best friends. One of them? She asks. Like third best. Out of how many? Look, the point is, you don't scare me. And I don't think you're ugly. She blinks away some more tears. I hate having to talk about her appearance because I know how self-conscious she is of her burns. I've got to just stop beating around the bush and get to the point. I think the weasel burned your parents. The EMT sitting in the back with us raises his eyebrow. I shake my head at him because it's too much to explain. I think the weasel can get into people's brains. He almost made me believe the things I was saying about you, but he made one mistake. He told me my big fear was that my parents don't love me, and I know they do. I know they do. My parents love me. My dad just gave me a harmonica and is going to teach me how to play the drums. Lily? Meredith whispers. Yeah? She leans in close so the EMT can't hear her. It didn't make me happy when my parents died. I know I said I liked it, but I didn't. That wasn't me. I wish they were still alive. Even though they locked you in the basement? They never did. She covers her mouth to stifle a sob. I don't know why I said that. They didn't do that to me, they loved me. Maybe those are the weasel's secrets. I suggest. Maybe when he's around us, he can make other people believe his secrets are theirs. That would mean he did it, right? Do you think Felix killed my parents? Yeah, I do. You know what else that means? What? The weasel is scared of clowns. At the hospital, I'm taken to get an X-ray while Meredith's foster dad meets her and gets her checked out. Apparently her foster mom, Mrs. Lake, is alright and just suffered a minor concussion from Felix banging her head against the wall, the jerk. I'm glad she's okay. Before we part, Meredith gives me a strong hug. I hug her back and whisper, "Watch out for weasels." After all, Felix is still out there. I hope he ran away to hide in a weasel den and leave Meredith and me alone for good, but someone like that, they're obsessed. I'm afraid he'll be back, and we'll have to deal with him again. The X-ray shows 2 broken ribs. To me, it feels like my whole insides were run through a blender. They put some sticky bandages on me and tell me to just rest and don't do any acrobatics. Also, avoid any more car crashes. That last part seems sadly harder to avoid than the first part. I've been in 2 serious ones in just 3 months after all. On the other hand, you see, Pachar? You were telling me that things were going to end badly. I mean, I guess they did for Officer Flowers. I feel bad for her. I wish I knew what she was about. Dumas said she wasn't there for me. I wonder who she was there for, because I don't think she went there for herself. Of course, with all us people and our totems and our angels together in the same place, it seemed to be scrambling the wires or something. Officer Flowers came for one of us and ended up being the one who died. I sensed my death, and yet here I am, still kicking. Well, okay, I better not kick anything right now. I breathe a sigh of relief and wait for my parents to come pick me up. I'm sorry, Lily, Pachar says. It's okay, even you, my best friend, can make a mistake from time to time. My mom eventually comes into the room, red-faced. She's been crying, and at the sight of me lying there waiting, all bandaged up, she breaks into crying again. She doesn't normally cry all that much, but maybe the whole thing with losing Roger in a car crash and then having to go to the hospital because I was in another one, it's probably all been too much for her. We hug and I pet her head. It's okay, I'm okay. I saved Meredith. I know you did, sweetie, she says, kissing me on the forehead. I suddenly remember that I don't know what happened to my dad. Is Daddy okay? Mom looks at me and holds my hands. She squeezes them just a bit too hard, but I don't cry or pull away, because I need to let her do it. She shakes her head so slowly. So very slowly. She blinks away tears. That man that attacked you, he apparently tied up your father and put him in the trunk of the car. Oh God. He was in the trunk the whole time. The car that I made crash. If I hadn't made Felix crash the car, maybe. I start to cry with her, and hug her, even though it hurts to be hugged. He's in intensive care. He suffered a lot of internal injuries, but he should be okay. Can we go see him? Sure. We can go back there and wait together, okay? She takes my hand and we head down to the ICU. I get this churning feeling in my gut as we walk past nurses' stations and doctors' offices. Maybe it's the pain medication they gave me earlier for my ribs. As we walk, I look down at the shiny tiles. I wonder how much mopping has to get done to make this place always look so clean. Except there, where there's a spot of blood. And there. In fact, actually there's a lot of blood splatters. It's becoming hard not to step in them. I'm surprised that Mom is just walking through it all carefree in her expensive shoes. Normally if she gets even a scuff mark on them, she goes ballistic. I guess there's more important things than shoes at the moment. I mean, I know there is, but Mom doesn't always think so. The blood on the ground starts flowing under our feet, like it's fresh. I look up and the hallway seems to be slowly flooding with bloody water. It's going up over the toes of my shoes, but Mom doesn't see it. She looks down at me with her sad eyes and tries to fake a smile. I want to tell her. I want to warn her about the blood that's running over our feet. Down the hall ahead of us, I see my cousin Susie swim past. God, I'm hallucinating again. What is happening to me? I close my eyes, and when I open them again, the blood is gone. The floor is clean and clear again. Moments later, we stop in front of a dimly lit room with a shaded window looking in. My dad is lying in a hospital bed with dozens of machines hooked up to him, and I can just make out someone standing next to him, leaning over, probably checking one of the many tubes or wires connected to him. My dad's face reminds me of Felix's, not in the weasel sense, but when I last saw Felix, and his face was all bruised and there was blood running down from his hair. I'm seeing so much blood today. I hope Felix is off somewhere bleeding right now. Can we ask the doctor how he's doing? I ask Mom. What doctor? I feel suddenly cold as the figure straightens up and turns around to look at me through the window. At least, I assume she's looking at me. Her face and most of her body has been burned black by the fire. I've come to terms with the fact that everything I know is a dream. Posted by Taya Fwans. As a preface, please note that this will probably be very long. I don't care if nobody reads it. Everyone in the world could read it, and nothing would change. I just need to voice my concerns for my own sake. Perhaps by organizing everything on a page I can make sense of things. Several years ago, I was in a brutal car accident. I was parked in front of a train track, waiting for the train to pass by. I was the last person not to make it across the tracks. For visualization, there was a solid stream of cars on either side. If I had tried to sneak across, I would have rear-ended the person in front of me before successfully clearing them. I could hear the train approaching, and the black and yellow bars lowered in front of me. I am fascinated by trains, so I was delighted to be so close, finally getting a front row seat. The train was about a quarter mile from the crossing when the driver behind me accelerated and nudged me forward a few feet. The bars bent and eventually snapped, and I was knocked joltingly onto the tracks. I panicked and threw the car into reverse, trying to back out. The other car apparently had more horsepower, however, and to my horror my car door aligned perfectly with the cattle guard on the front of the train. I scrambled to get out of the car, but forgot about my seatbelt. I nearly strangled myself trying to get free. By the time I unlatched it, it was too late. One fraction of a second of the loudest sound I had ever heard, and then blackness and silence. I was certain that I had died. I didn't feel any pain, and certainly if I had survived I'd be in agony. I tried to open my eyes, but nothing would happen. I tried to make a sound, to wiggle my fingers, or do anything, but I couldn't. It wasn't that I was paralyzed. It was more like I didn't have a body to manipulate. I was just a mind submerged in a pool of nothing. The only sentiment I felt was that I had returned to that state after being gone for a long time. Like forgetting how your parents' house smells until you visit home for the holidays. Gradually, I started to have feelings of sensation. Passing waves of warmth and wetness finally allowed me to determine where the edges of my body were. Almost as soon as I became aware of my physical self, it began to ache. I felt as if every inch of me had been pummeled with a baseball bat, the heavy wooden kind. Even opening my eyes was a spectacular ordeal. I was in a hospital. So I had survived after all. People moved to surround me. Faces that never fully came into focus hovered above my own, and sounds that vaguely resembled speech seemed to reach me through water. It wasn't long before I felt weak again and my eyes closed. This fading in and out of consciousness lasted for what felt like a very long time, maybe months, though the doctors told me it was only a matter of days. After that, I worked on speaking and swallowing food, which seems silly, but it was actually a challenge at the time. Finally, as more and more casts were removed, I was allowed to sit up and turn my head, for which I was incredibly grateful. According to my family and my then-girlfriend Sarah, all of whom were overjoyed at being able to speak with me, I was asleep for several days on end after the crash. I remember Sarah specifically saying she had missed being able to stare at those beautiful eyes. Time passed at an excruciatingly slow pace until physical therapy finally escalated to the point where I could be pushed around in a wheelchair. The doctors were surprisingly hopeful that I'd be able to walk again, but it was what they called cautious optimism. Nobody wanted to tell me I could be independent again, and then have to admit they were wrong later. Obviously, I was very hopeful myself, though even transferring from chair to bed was a painful challenge. It was around this time that I noticed I never dreamed anymore. When I slept, I only felt the same nothingness that I felt immediately after the crash. All the days blended together for a while after that. The next memory I can actually separate from the rest is the first time I tried walking on my own. There were staff members holding on to my arms and waist, just in case I fell, and with their help, I made it all the way across the room on my first try. The doctors said they had never seen such a rapid recovery. I was giddy. Obviously, I wasn't out of the woods yet, but soon I was allowed to live at home again with frequent PT sessions, and some weeks after that, I returned to work. Life was almost normal for a while. Except for a very slight limp in my left leg, the side that the train hit me on, I was feeling pretty normal. It was only after about a month of living in my own house that weird things started to happen. The first thing I noticed was that I felt an occasional stinging on my right forearm, like a thin needle was puncturing my skin. It was a tiny prick, maybe twice a day at most. I figured it was just nerve trauma or something and blocked it from my mind. Feigning ignorance was harder to do when I started hearing things, though. While I was reading in bed one night, I thought I heard Sarah crying. I strained my ears to make sure, and I definitely heard her sobs, but very distantly, like I was submerged in a pool. I made my way downstairs quickly, concerned that she had hurt herself or something, but she was just washing dishes in the kitchen. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously. "Yeah, why?" she asked nonchalantly. "No reason." I dismissed these oddities as best I could. After all, how could anyone expect to recover from being hit by a goddamn train without some lingering effects? Every so often, mostly when I was trying to fall asleep or sitting in a silent room, I would hear occasional sounds that I couldn't connect at first. Gradually, I determined that they were hospital sounds, stretchers being rolled across tiled floors, beeping from machines, rapid chatter between nurses and doctors. Although I figured anyone who had suffered as much trauma as I had would experience some degree of whatever I was experiencing, I decided to bring it up with my doctor. He told me it was perfectly normal for someone in my circumstances, and he could prescribe me a sleep aid if I felt it was necessary. I told him it wasn't a big deal. I was just satisfied that a doctor could explain my symptoms. The odd glimpses of what seemed to be my past only increased in frequency. When I slept, I finally dreamed again, but it was always the same thing. If I saw anything at all, it was a hospital room. Sometimes there were other people in the room, and sometimes I was alone with the machines. There was one night in particular in which the dream was more vivid and gripping than usual. My eyes opened wearily to see Sarah asleep on the chair beside my hospital bed. "Sarah?" I croaked. She jerked awake. "Henry!" She scrambled to my side, clutching my hand. At this point, it occurred to me that I was dreaming. I stared right into Sarah's eyes. "I'm asleep right now." She seemed concerned. "No, Henry. You're finally awake. I'm right here. It's been so long." "Of course you would say that. You're a part of my dream." I smiled, amused. "I'll probably wake up any second." But as I spoke, the familiar soreness caught up to me all at once. It practically knocked the wind from my lungs. "Henry, no." Her distress was now evident. "I don't know what you're talking about. Stay with me, Henry. Stay awake. Look at me." I shook my head defiantly and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in my own bed. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. I sat awake, pondering what I had just seen. I thought I heard Sarah crying again, even though I could see her sleeping beside me. When Sarah finally woke up, she rolled over and laid an arm across my chest. "Good morning, big guy." She smiled groggily. "If I was asleep right now, would you tell me?" I asked. "What?" She chuckled. "That's kinda heavy stuff to drop on a sleepy person. Just bear with me. If I was asleep right now dreaming, would you tell me?" "Well, I feel pretty real," she noted, patting different parts of her body. "Do you think I'm not real?" "Of course not," I said. We got ready for our day. I couldn't stop thinking about my dream, though. I noticed that when I tried really hard to space out at work, and listened closely enough, I could hear the hospital sounds more clearly. I was naturally concerned about this. That night, I went to bed early, and just as I thought, I was transported immediately to the hospital bed. I felt the thin sheets beneath my fingers. I opened my eyes, and Sarah was reading a book in the same chair as before. I just looked at her for a long time, trying to discern if she was real. She certainly seemed real enough. She turned pages with the same flourish that she always had, and chewed on one of the temples of her reading glasses. Eventually, she looked up and met my eyes. "You're awake again," she gasped. "Victoria! Paul! He's awake!" My parents entered the room moments later, looking excited. I talked with them all for a long time. Of course, my parents, too, denied the fact that I was asleep, but that topic passed quickly. Instead, we discussed my condition. I had been in a coma for almost 3 months with little response. They had been slowly losing hope for my recovery until my brain showed signs of activity. Since that time, they had been visiting me frequently, hoping that I would wake up. It seemed a pretty convincing story. After many hours of talking, I had to stop. I was legitimately sleepy. Of course, they all understood and I fell back asleep. Only this time, I didn't wake up in my own bed. I woke up in the same hospital bed a few hours later. I had to think about it for a very long time, but eventually concluded that I must have imagined my miraculous recovery, and had been in a coma the whole time after all. As you can imagine, it was hard to accept at first. Since then, I have been making a second recovery, which has been slower and less successful than the first. That's why, for a long time, I was mostly convinced that I'm really awake this time. Nobody walks after getting blindsided by a train, at least not without lots of hard work. I've still only left my wheelchair on crutches, and it's been 6 years. It probably sounds like a bittersweet ending, and at one point I agreed. I was prepared to live happily ever after in my wheelchair, and maybe even graduate to crutches someday, except for one thing. When I'm getting ready for bed, after I turn off my lamp and my head hits the pillow, I can still hear them, the faint sounds of a busy hospital. I know that many of you will say, "But I'm real. This is real life. Of course you're awake." But that's what you're supposed to say. Nobody's going to tell me, "I'm fake. You're dreaming, wake up." I'm still asleep, and I've learned to deal with it. I know that nobody I meet during the day is real, but I'm tired, so I just pretend, and that will have to do. I found a list I've never seen before in my kitchen. It's in my handwriting. Posted by Jackson. It all started with an unfamiliar line of dried blood on my cheek. Where did this blood come from? Not from me. I examined my entire body in the bathroom and I couldn't even find a scrape. My head felt empty. It's not just that I couldn't remember where the blood came from, I couldn't remember anything. It all began this morning. I awoke to a ray of sunlight sitting on my eyelids. Groaning, I rotated my neck towards my alarm clock. 11 a.m. I pulled myself out of bed reflexively and walked a few feet to the bathroom. I saw the blood in the mirror and realized that I couldn't remember anything. What's the word again? Amnesia. I found the answer somewhere inside my head. Standing in the empty bedroom, staring at the unmade bed, I realized that the word amnesia wasn't quite correct. Recurring dissociative amnesia. Somehow, I knew that was the correct expression. The thought stuck out in my brain like the dried blood on my light complexion. Nothing else would come. My mind was a lockbox and I hadn't yet found the right key. My bedroom was empty. The blinds were drawn. A few feet from the bed stood a new-looking forward desk. On top of it was a laptop. The screen was dark but light emanated from the computer's on switch. Sleep mode. I walked out of the bedroom. The hallway outside looked so familiar. Its white walls and gray carpet felt very natural to me. My house. I meandered past the closed door. As I reached my hand out to turn the knob, an uninvited word came to mind. Guest room. I left the door closed. Somehow, I felt like what I was looking for was somewhere else. The hallway ended in a carpeted staircase. At the bottom of the stairs was a large wooden door with a glass pane, clearly the front door. An unknown reflex guided me away from the door, towards an open kitchen and dining area. I caught a glimpse of a love seat and an armchair in a room adjacent to the kitchen, and a glass door beyond that. Living room. Backyard. This kitchen was familiar as well, but it was in a particular state of disarray. Dirty dishes filled not just the sink but the surrounding counter area. Cupboards were torn open and a bag of sugar and cans of vegetables lay broken on the floor. The fridge was standing open and the smell of spoiled milk poured out of it. With a hand up to my nose, I closed it. My gaze turned towards the dining room table. In a room of chaos, it was the only thing that was pristine. On it lay a sheet of notebook paper filled with writing. My list. Instinctively, somehow, I knew that the contents of this sheet were important to me. As I grasped it, I discerned that all the words filling the page were not just familiar, they were mine. From the first Y on the page to the last N, I could tell it was my handwriting. I wrote everything on this sheet. I had no recollection of doing so. The list is composed of 10 items numerically placed from top to bottom. All of the letters near the top, the first 5 entries, are written in my neatest handwriting. Handwriting I somehow knew was reserved in a past life for filling in tax forms. These entries are all written in black ink with a ballpoint pen. The 6th entry is also written neatly, although it's written in blue ink, presumably at a different point of time. The 7th entry is written in red ink, a long-handed, messy script, clearly mine, but also clearly demonstrating a lack of concern with its appearance. The last 3 entries are written in a fat, green marker. They're messy and rambling and take up more than half the page. My eyes scanned the page. None of it made any sense to me at first, like I was reading a foreign language. Obviously I knew what each word meant, but it was as though they didn't fit together. Then, one at a time, the items on the list began to trigger memories in the back of my head. Only then did I remember writing them. Number 1. Your name is Travis Hoy. You live at 756 Camelot Lane in Gillimon County with your wife Rebecca. Rebecca. Some of the fog was beginning to clear. Rebecca, my wife. She had dark hair and an impossibly light complexion. No, that wasn't right. Her hair was blonde, but she had started dyeing it recently. She liked to do things like that. How long had we been married? Not too long. A few years maybe, but I'm still having a hard time remembering how many. I knew who she was and I could picture her in my mind, but I had no memories of us together. I could only picture her alone in a never-ending expanse of black. She's wearing a white dress with red roses dancing across it. She's smiling and her hair messily covers part of her face. Then I read the next entry. Number 2. You have a steel plate in your head. You sustained acute brain damage during an attempted mugging. I stumbled over backwards like I've been pushed. My legs barely held me up. Unpleasant images and violent memories were suddenly falling back into place. My hand trembling, I reached up towards the left side of my skull. I tapped with a shaking finger. A metallic noise echoed inside. The mugging. It was in January. It had been snowing. Rebecca was with me. We were coming back from a movie. No, a play. You can't take it with you, I believe. Sorry, some of the memories are still coming back. I hadn't enjoyed the play. It wasn't nearly as funny as I had envisioned. Rebecca had loved it, particularly the old man who made fireworks in the basement. We hadn't been able to park close to the theater. We were several blocks away. I recommended we cut through an alleyway. It's Denver, I told her. It's perfectly safe. She was reluctant. She reminded me that there was a serial killer loose in the area, who had yet to be identified. I ignored her protests and dragged her through the alleyway. A man was waiting there. Not a serial killer, just a common thief. He had a gun. His hand was trembling. He must have been nervous. Why should he have been nervous? He was the one mugging us. Give me your wallet! There was no argument from me. I knew better than that. The purse too. Becca's face looked pale, even framed by her then blonde hair. Okay, but just let me get my keys first. No. Now. Please. She reached into the purse. The man raised the gun. She really was just reaching for her keys, she would later confide in me. But he must have thought she was searching for a gun of her own. I threw my body in front of her own. Then I heard a deafening bang and everything went dark. The next thing I remember is the hospital. The bullet shattered part of my skull, but didn't kill me. Part of my skull was lodged in my cerebral cortex. I set the paper down. The memory had stopped there. There was a part of me that thought I shouldn't read anymore, that I shouldn't let any more memories in. Instinctively I knew the rest of the items on the list would upset me, but I couldn't stop. Number 3. You suffer from recurring dissociative amnesia due to the damage. Dr. Phillips instructed you to make a list of important facts to assist in restoring your memory when it's been forgotten. It's critical that you focus on things that you've documented, as false memory creation is a potential concern. Dr. Phillips was my therapist. He was an old, patient man. Rebecca had found him actually, said he had a doctorate from a nearby college that was supposed to be all that. You're going to have these episodes of forgetfulness for a while. Maybe even forever. But visual reminders should cue your hippocampus to retrieve memories that you've buried. That's what he said. That was the inspiration for this list. How long ago had that been? Days? Weeks? Months? At this point, small memories were coming back in flashes. It's hard to explain, but it was like I had short films playing in my head, but that certain scenes and clips were missing. Number 4. Your amnesia is usually triggered by periods of extreme stress. It is important that you relax and keep your head clear. I looked up from the note to the shambles of a kitchen that surrounded me. A puddle of juice and smashed carrots covered part of the floor. The carrots had gone brown. I still don't know how long I had been asleep. I figured that whatever created this mess must have triggered my amnesia. Were we robbed? The funny thing is, I don't remember how the mess was made. I don't remember much of anything before I was in the bathroom. I barely remember waking up. The first thing I can clearly remember is the dried blood on my face. Reading this entry triggered a few brief memories of being told by Dr. Phillips and Rebecca that I had blacked out before. But I still had no memory of the most recent blackout that placed me where I was now. Number 5. You work at the local supermarket. Dr. Phillips said it would be helpful for your mind to receive new stimulation on a daily basis. Rebecca works from home. I groaned. I had forgotten about work. I briefly considered calling in, but I figured based on the state of disarray in my home, I probably had bigger fish to fry. I didn't like my job, it was far beneath my level of intelligence, but it was easy for the supermarket to retrain me if the memories of how to do my job disappeared. This item on the list triggered a whole host of memories. Rebecca is medical transcriptionist. She types of the audio recordings of doctors' notes, so they have a written copy. That's why she worked from home. Before my accident, before I was shot, I used to be an accountant at a big firm. It brought in lots of money. It bought Rebecca and I this house. I think before the accident that we were planning on having kids. She always wanted 2 of them, a little boy and a little girl. They were going to be named after her grandparents, Lincoln and Claire. My mind was filled with images of Rebecca's face stained with tears while she told me not to blame myself. We couldn't have kids now. My memory loss was too big of a liability. I turned back to the paper. The next entry was the first that looked like it had been written at a different point in time than the rest. Number 6. In August 2016, your cousin Scott moved in with you and Rebecca. He works out of your home as well. Scott is my only living family member. The rest died in a car accident when he and I were just kids. We actually hadn't seen each other in years, but he sought me out after the mugging. He's always kind of been a burnout, but the kind of burnout who had insane computer programming skills. That's what he did from home. Scott was nice enough to offer to help take care of things after my injury, although I always felt like he was just using the opportunity to move into a nicer house. Still, he helped with the chores and he took care of stressful things that the doctor had recommended I stay away from, like paying bills. Rebecca thought it was nice to have someone else bringing money into the house, although she was wary at first because she had never heard about him before. Scott and I were never very close, and like I said, we didn't see each other often. At this point, it occurred to me exactly how alone I was. There was no movement or creaking throughout the house. Just suffocating silence. If Rebecca and Scott both work from home, shouldn't they be here? I stood up from my kitchen table and tiptoed into our living room. It was in shambles as well. The 2 chairs I had seen previously were in fairly good condition, but the rest of the room was a wreck. A flat screen lay overturned on the floor, dark glass blended in deceivingly with the carpet. In the corner of the room, propped neatly against the stucco wall, was a long piece of wood with a large metal head. Sledgehammer. The head of the hammer was a rusty burgundy. The carpet beneath the hammer was distinctively different than the cream color of the surrounding carpet. It was a dried brown crimson color. Blood. Something bad had happened in this house. I looked at the glass door that led to our backyard. Blinds were drawn, blocking the outside. There was dried mud on the floor surrounding the door. The corners of my vision were starting to go gray. My head felt heavy and I had an overwhelming urge to lie down. My own voice started screaming in my head, trying to reason with me. No. Don't go to sleep. But I'm so tired. It's the stress. It's triggering another blackout. You need to take a breath and relax. My chest was heaving and my breaths were sharp and irregular. Hyperventilating. I took a deep breath. The gray in my vision began to fade. Air filled my lungs and my heart began to beat in a more regular rhythm. After a few minutes I felt normal again. I stood up slowly and returned to the kitchen table. Some part of me knew that I had to finish reading, understanding, the list. Number 7. Does Rebecca even still love me? Tears welled in my eyes. We had been having problems. Visions of Rebecca and I yelling filled my head. I'm sorry. I just can't keep it all straight. I'm doing my best. This is your best, Travis? I'm tired of reminding you who I am. I'm tired of getting calls from the police because you've fallen asleep on the side of the road. I didn't ask for this. I'm doing my best to provide for us. Provide for us? The only one who does anything to provide for us is Scott. Fuck Scott! Rebecca and I are standing in the kitchen and yelling at one another. There are multiple memories like this. She and I fighting about my amnesia. Some of them I can tell what we're fighting about, some of them I can't. Scott is usually a topic of conflict, but it isn't always clear why. I kept staring at the list. The next item was the first written in the chaotic green marker. Green bled in the tiny veins on the paper, creating a frantic, unearthly look in my writing. Number 8. Rebecca and Scott are getting really close. They're probably fucking while I'm at work. I hate myself, I'll kill us all. Oh God. Paranoia. Depression. Both of those things had become notable staples in my recent existence. Rebecca was usually cold to me. Numerous impressions of her ignoring me or treating me like an idiot danced in front of my eyes. I remembered the nervousness in my stomach while I stood bagging groceries, thinking of them alone together. The pain of how that felt still hurt. I realized that I was crying. All these painful memories were coming to the surface at once. I'll kill us all. I had written that. Had I killed my wife and cousin? I couldn't remember. I remember being so upset at the two of them. But I also remember still feeling all the love for Rebecca. I couldn't have killed them, could I? Then an unfamiliar word fought its way to the surface of the conflicting ideas in my head. Guest room. I practically ran up the stairs. The memories were starting to come back, but I wanted to see it myself before they did. The guest room door remained perfectly close. With the blank walls beside it and the immaculately clean floor beneath it, it was a visage of white. When I threw the door open, my vision filled with red. The bed was smeared in red, the walls were smeared in red, even the fucking ceiling. There was blood blanketing most of the room. It was old, dried blood. All I could smell was the sickening scent of iron. I felt a pressure rise in my chest. I could remember the sound of a hammer hitting something soft and wet. I could remember a scream. A woman's scream. Rebecca. I held my hand over my mouth and pulled myself out of the room. I struggled to keep my composure. Gray clouds were already beginning to fill my vision, but I was struggling to keep myself calm. If I had killed Rebecca, I wanted to be sure. There was no body in the guest room. I had no recollection of where I might have hidden it. It took me almost 15 minutes to get back to the kitchen. Every few steps I had to stop and calm myself down. The minute details of Rebecca's death kept replaying in my head. Eventually I made it. I picked up the note, intent on finishing it. Number 9. Rebecca is in the garden. The dirt around the back door. She was buried in our garden. Rebecca loved the garden so much. Before my accident, we used to spend hours every weekend planting and watering. It was so peaceful out there. She loved planning what we were going to grow every year: tomatoes, strawberries, rhubarb. It made perfect sense to bury her somewhere that she truly loved. I can see her, in my mind. She's wearing a white dress with red roses dancing across it. The muscles around her mouth have relaxed and fallen into a macabre smile. Her hair is caked with dirt. Shovels full of dirt cover her body one by one. I could go outside and look for the body, but it would be pointless. I'm certain that she's there. By this point, it had taken me almost 2 hours to understand this whole list. It was barely a page, yet reading it felt like I had read a whole book. There was only one item left. I was confident that I had murdered Rebecca, maybe Scott too. I knew that I needed to call the police and confess. But first, I finished the list. Number 10. It's not what it looks like. Check the computer. This item made no sense to me. I remembered the computer in my room, but nothing else. Still, I had to know what it meant. Going back upstairs was difficult. Walking past the open door to the guest room nearly sent me overboard, but I survived it. I stood in my bedroom, where I had first come to the realization that something was off. Where I had first found the blood on my face that sent me spiraling. The computer was still on. Sleep mode, like I had initially thought. There was no passcode. When I clicked on the power button, it sprang to life. The desktop was clear except for a single icon, Google Chrome. I clicked on it. It brought me to the generic Google search screen. There were 2 bookmarks, 2 different news articles. I dragged the cursor to one and opened it. A headline blared on the screen. Gilliman County Crusher still at large. The story detailed a serial killer in our area. He was famous for breaking into women's homes. He would tie them up, torture them, and then murder them. Police were baffled by him. He had gone months without capture despite the horrific scenes he left in people's homes. His signature was crushing the skulls of his victims with a sledgehammer. Sledgehammer. There was a sledgehammer in the living room. I shivered. I couldn't be the Crusher, could I? I had no recollection of doing anything like that. So far, whenever I read something that had meaning to me, it triggered a flood of memories. But I didn't remember killing anyone. I clicked on the other bookmark. It was a new article from 15 years ago, an obituary detailing an accident. Family dies in freak auto accident. This article brought back memories by the dozen. Images of my family's van sliding on the ice, crashing through a highway divider, hitting a car going the other direction. Another boy is sitting adjacent to me on the seat. He's my age. The car hit us on his side. His body was crushed. I remember watching him crumple and fold into a knot of gore and metal. I remembered the funeral. standing with a police officer at my side, tears running lines down my face. I remember burying them all. My mother, my father, my aunts, my uncles, all dead. And the boy on the seat next to me, my cousin Scott. I was the only survivor. The article confirms what I've said. It lists the names of the deceased, including Scott Hoy. How could he have been living with us then? Who was the person that had moved in with us? I picked up the note again. Again and again I read it, searching for any clue that might explain what happened. My eye caught item 3 of the list. It's critical that you focus on things that you've documented, as false memory creation is a potential concern. False memory creation. It clicked. The person living with us, the person that I had told my wife was a long-lost cousin of mine, the person who spent all day alone with Rebecca while I was at work worrying, he wasn't really my cousin. But he was convincing. I remember watching him tie Rebecca down to the bed, the stress already causing my vision to go dark. I remember the hammer. I remember her pleading, begging me to stand up and help. I remember tears covering my cheeks and feeling absolutely powerless. I remember Scott cackling madly as he swung the hammer against her again and again. I remember the sick noise of bones cracking and Rebecca screaming in pain. I remember her shrill, ear-piercing scream, and then it goes black. I think I've figured out what happened. This serial killer person, he convinced me that he was my long-lost cousin. There are suddenly memories of when I first met him. He came to the hospital right after the accident. No one else was there at the time. He brought flowers, red tulips. We talked about the injury and my family. He came back every week until I just assumed it was the same Scott I had known when we were kids. I had convinced Rebecca of the same. I had no recent memories of him, but I wrote it off as a symptom of my injury. She was under too much stress to really question it. He murdered Rebecca. I wonder how many times I've woken up and come to this realization and then blacked out from stress. Judging by the state of disarray in my home and the dried blood in the guest room, this isn't the first time. I know I should call the police, but my head feels so heavy. Everything is cloudy. My bed looks very, very soft. I'm so tired. I think I'll go back to sleep and call them when I wake up. Don't worry. I'll remember. I got out of the hospital a few months ago, but I can't forget about the stump. Posted by, as for class. I never ran past the stump. Never. The stump had been there for years. At the edge of where I turned around on my runs. Right at that point where I knew I would have a hard time getting back without walking. Except for that day. Last spring around noon on a Saturday. Gentle breeze, high 70s. The sun dipping behind the clouds every few minutes. Perfect weather. Something about the daylight had always made me feel insecure. It was the night we were always supposed to be wary of. The shadows and the silence. When the bugs would stop making noises, that's when you were supposed to worry. That's when the hairs were supposed to raise. When everything felt wrong. Not during the day, though. Not when everything was supposed to be safe. That was never how I worked, though. I was always wary of the daytime growing up. I never had nightmares at night. My nightmares were during nap times, during the day when everyone else thought the world was safe. I grew up as a cautious type of kid. I was afraid of a lot of things. Being alone used to matter so much more. I slept in my parents' bed until I was 4 or 5, and even after that I felt uneasy sleeping alone. Most kids feel safe if they bundle up enough in their blankets, but I never felt safe. I always felt as if I were laying on an island surrounded by evil, and nothing I could do could protect me from that. Back in high school, running was easier. I could eat what I wanted, and run whenever I felt like. My run time really never got affected by those things. I was a quick kid, too. I was running low 5-minute miles. One time I even ran a 450 mile. Not really competition speeds for college, but pretty good for a kid who just enjoyed going to city runs on the weekends. I used to imagine myself as a gazelle, running from a cheetah or some other large cat. The cats win, sometimes, but the gazelle has form over power, grace over strength. When chased, the gazelle will take every step with the intent to survive. That need to live. That was the past. After all that time, running 6-minute miles hurt. I became more of a 7-minute mile type, which was fine. I wasn't racing anymore, just doing it for fun. For me, running had always been a form of meditation. About a mile or so into a run, everything would loosen up and it'd become easier to stride out. The stress on the body always felt good and pushed my mind to concentrate on the moment, to decompress, to reevaluate. On that Saturday, everything felt right. Everything was more than fine. It was the perfect day. I was approaching the stump and I felt amazing. The best I had felt on a run in years. I approached the stump and I hurdled it like a track star. I didn't feel like I scraped anything, it was a clean jump. But I still heard a scratching sound. I didn't turn back, I was just in the zone. Birds and other animals in the woods were common on my runs. I ended up running another mile into the woods. I had never been that deep in. I was probably around 5 miles from the house when I saw a bit of smoke in the distance. I knew that there were other trails in the woods, but the trail I used was the nice one. The trail that the sun could touch almost all day. It was a cottage. That's where the smoke was coming from, the random cottage's chimney out deep in the woods. Totally not fit for anything to live in, but there it was. Something about the way the house sat on its foundation made it seem to be twisted. Somehow abnormal. The windows were uncharacteristically high, almost beginning at chest level. I started to run in place, considering whether or not to keep moving forward or to turn back. The curtains in the window had some sort of floral pattern. I didn't want to trespass. I never knew who the woods really belonged to out there. Suddenly, the curtain was thrown back and the figure behind the window was looking at me, barely peeking over the base of the windowsill. The eyes were wide. I turned and I ran toward home. It seemed so far. It took me a very long time to make it back to the woods I was familiar with. I just kept running, pumping my arms and moving my legs. Breathing. Strong inhale. Strong exhale. Strong inhale. Strong exhale. Focus. Equal breathing. Equal breathing. That's when I saw the stump. Except it didn't look the same. Not how I was used to seeing it. Granted, I had never approached the stump from that side before. But I knew that there was something wrong. My chest tensed up just a little bit more. I slowed down to give some rest to my hips. There was some sort of lump on the tree stump that I had never seen. Some type of cancer. The closer I got, the less the lump looked like a part of the tree. It looked like some kind of matted hair, clumped and moist. I had slowed down to almost a walk. I was just a few strides away from the stump when the moist lump opened its eyes. It was some type of animal, covered in a dark brown fur that almost camouflaged with the stump's bark. It was only after the eyes opened that I realized both of the animal's long arms were draped over my side of the stump. The head was far behind the stump. All I could see were the eyes peeking over, like the animal was hiding from me. Hi 3I, all Alexander. Alexander the stranger. The runner, the lone ranger. Don't look suppressed. You don't remember me? We used to be so close. You slept on top of the bed, and I slept bellalo, it said. I looked at the arms of the animal, covered in hair, powerful looking. I couldn't bring myself to speak, at first. I hesitated. Are you the devil? Ah, Alex, the devil is just a story. I'm very real. I'm you. I'm not you. I'm something different. Something blue. Something better, it said. The animal started to tap the log's bark with all of its fingers. Its way of speaking seemed to trail off on certain words in a weird, distracted tone. "I need to go. I want to go home," I said. I was looking at the hands of the animal, at the claws. It was tapping its fingers against the bark. I noticed my breathing wasn't rapid. I wasn't out of breath at all from the run. Instead, I was barely breathing at all. Like I kept forgetting to take another breath every few seconds. I turned my head to look back at the cottage quickly to see if anything was coming from that direction. Nothing was there. I quickly turned my head back forward to keep my eyes on the creature behind the stump. "Oh, now wow, Alex. Don't you worry about Mother. You'll never get to meet her, all Alex sex. That's what I'm here for. You shouldn't have looked. Didn't you learn to never peek under the bed, Alex? Triple X. Not the sex. Not the sex. You aren't going where you want to. This isn't the trail home. The tale of tears. The trail of fears. We're going to do something else," it said. Up until that point the eyes had been wondering, contemplating what the next words would be. The animals seemed to enjoy the rhymes. Every rhyme would strike some sort of emotional chord with my childhood. The shows I watched, the things I would say growing up. Then the animal's eyes locked right into mine. "The things I'm going to do to you, Alex. Oh, you haven't lived until you've the things I will do to your innards. The belly. Inside. I don't want to ruin the surprise, but oh. The things we are going to do," it said. I heard it clack its teeth together a few times. I swallowed and reminded myself to breath. I made myself say something. "Please. Don't," was all that came out. I couldn't see its mouth, but I could imagine its smile. It was in the eyes. Everything about the animal was inhuman, except for the eyes. Baby blues. They could have been my eyes. The eyes squinted a little in an expression mixed with intent. "Are you going to pee yourself? Are you going to piss this?" Little Alex pissed the bed. Pissed the bed and slept in the shed. "You can't hide from me, Alex. You can't run away. This is our moment together. Are you going to pee-pee?" cried to Mother. I used to lick it up. Every time I would lick it all up. I would suck that bed dry after a good soiling. What it must taste like after all these years. I've waited, Alex. I've waited to taste it from the source. Pure. Unfiltered. I've followed you for a very long time. Go ahead and do it for me, Alex. I just want to smell it," the animal said. I heard it lick its lips and start clicking its teeth. I could hear them like pieces of metal clacking together. And then the animal slowly raised its head above the stump. There was no smile. Just a wide mouth of teeth. Row upon row into the blackness of its throat. As if the teeth would never end once something strayed past the animal's hairy lips. "No," was all I could say. "No? Oh, Alex. We know no won't go. No. I'm going to step over this stump and you are going to let me do it. All the dreams are about to happen. Let me suck on it. Your hand, your foot, your leg, your flesh. Just a nibble. Just the tipsis." The animal began to laugh. Seeing the teeth, hearing the laughter. The depth of the animal's almost human voice. Scratchy like the voice was being filtered through burning coals on a fire. My bladder let out everything. The moment that happened, the animal stopped laughing and threw its head back in the air to take in the smell. I could see its nostrils expand to an unreasonable size. Maybe it was fear, maybe that was why. Once I realized it was going to keep its head back a moment, I shot into the edge of the woods to the right. That day was my best run in so long that I had to chance it. I had to try to escape. To run for my life. Miles. I still had miles until I would make it back home. And I wasn't on any trail. I was just running through the middle of the woods, hitting the dead pine needles with my feet. Needles that were never cleared by anyone. You could have buried anything in those woods. If someone disappeared out there, that would have been it. The animal realized a few seconds after I broke the tree line that I wasn't going to wait. I didn't hear it talk, but I did hear it start moving behind me. The movement was what kept me sprinting, kept me pushing myself. I heard the legs, there seemed to be so many of them. And the trees. The animal was so strong that every few breaths I was taking I would hear a tree get splintered, or another tree fall down. And it was gaining on me. Another tree fell. I could hear the animal breathing. "All Alex," it said. "Alex." I couldn't turn around. I didn't want to. If it weren't for the terrain, I would have closed my eyes, hidden deep inside myself and hoped to wake up alive. The breathing was so close, almost right next to my ears. I didn't want to see. I didn't want to see the moment happen. I wanted to try to fight until the very end. And that's when I found another trail. Out of nowhere. It was going in the same direction as the main trail I had always ran down. I didn't think of anything besides getting home and escaping. I opened up my stride and I did my best to breathe correctly. Pumped my arms, perfect form, perfect form. Not slamming my feet, not arching my back too much, staying forward, letting my core be involved. It was the most important run of my life. I was the gazelle. Breath out. I had to be. Breath in. I needed to be perfect. Breath out. I needed to live. Breath in. I knew I had a chance if I could sustain the pace, maintain, and not look back. Even on the trail, I could still hear the animal crashing through the woods behind me, as if the trail wasn't wide enough for whatever size the animal must have been. I didn't want to think about how massive it was, how easily the animal was going to tear me apart, how my skin was going to feel sliding off my bones. I tried to keep my mind on the run, on the breathing, on staying consistent, pushing off with each step. Long strides. I could make it if I kept the form, kept the breathing, ignored the pain in my shins, in my thighs. How my hamstrings were starting to pull with the strain I was putting myself under, forcing myself to open up my stride. I was past muscle failure when I ran past the stump. I wasn't sure how I was doing what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to live. Knew that if I kept that in my mind I could do it. I was so close. I saw the edge of the woods, and there was maybe a quarter of a mile before I was out. I wasn't sure how I had never seen the trail I was on. It appeared that the trail would connect with the main trail before the end. I was there. I was going to make it. The animal kept running after me. It must have had so many legs, smashing through the bushes and tearing apart all of the trees. 10 feet away from the wood line, I took a step but my foot didn't land right. The animal had caught me by grabbing a hold of my foot. I was pulled to the ground. My head hit something while I was being flipped upside down. The animal raised me up to its face and spoke. "Alex, I love games. I told you that you couldn't run. Was that torture for you? I let you get this far." The animal's tongue came out of its mouth. Long and grotesque, the tongue slipped down my shorts to taste the urine. It was a violating sensation. Sandpaper. If I hadn't already done so, I would have urinated myself again. "Salty," the animal said. I was shaking. There's a certain type of anticipation that the body experiences when the mind knows everything is about to end. I could feel it in the back of my neck. A kind of tingle. Instead of forgetting to breathe, I couldn't get enough air. My lungs were a vacuum. I was upside down, but raised high enough to be eye level with the animal. The creature was something old and eternal, the hair matted in odd places, patches of scales, sharp joints of a being that should have died when the planet was young. My heart ached. To be so close to home, but instead be looking at true evil. The monster. The devil. To see the matted hair and the black line over the blue eyes. "Oh, Alex, sweetie. No tears? Now, do stop screaming. No one can hear you in this terrible dream," the animal said. The smell was too complicated for human noses to understand. It was disgusting and as hot as a furnace. My skin felt tighter after each breath from the creature. And the animal was right, I was screaming. I didn't even realize it, my mind was in so many places. I couldn't think of anything to do. I was trapped, caught. Please! The only word I managed to get out. Don't mind if I do, boy. What happened next was so fast. I was instantly flipped right side up and I watched as the animal opened its mouth wide. All those teeth seemed to be infinite. An impossibly deep throat. A part of my mind thought I was looking into hell itself. There was no fire, just the heat of it. There was only teeth. The animal's tongue slid out of the mouth and wrapped around my leg and drifted up. I tried to struggle away, but there was nowhere to go in that amount of time. I saw my leg slowly being pulled into the mouth. The end. I closed my eyes. My skin slid off of the bone like the icicle on a popsicle stick. I felt the tug, the pressure, and then I heard a pop and a feeling of release. At first, I couldn't tell if the fire that shot up my leg was the heat from the animal's mouth or the pain. It was searing. I couldn't help but look. See what had happened. I was bleeding everywhere. So much blood drenching the animal's face. I realized why the animal's fur was all matted. It had its eyes closed, enjoying the blood spraying all over it. Half of my leg was gone. Disappeared in the animal's mouth. The pain was everywhere, and I was surprised that I had not immediately gone into shock. I knew that I needed to keep my head together. I needed to concentrate. Then I heard the crunching. The animal started to chew. It was eating my leg. It dropped me to the ground. It seemed to be caught up in the sensation, like it hadn't eaten in years. And maybe it hadn't. I didn't care. I needed to escape. I needed to get home. Home. I was almost in my backyard. I was 10 feet away. There was so much blood, I knew I had only a few minutes. Maybe seconds. I needed to get to my backyard, I needed to crawl. I rolled over to my stomach and I moved every remaining limb as fast as I could. No. Ugh, UK. Stuck. Stop. The animal's mouth was full. I had the notion that it didn't want to stop chewing. It paused, as if to decide whether it should just enjoy what it had, or to catch me. Maybe it paused intentionally. By the time the animal made the decision to lunge at me, I had rolled the rest of the way into my backyard. I had done it. I made it back. I rolled to my back. I knew I needed to stop the bleeding. Seconds mattered. I ripped off all of my clothes and tore them to tie a tourniquet. I pulled the knots tight and covered the stump that remained of my leg. My heart was still beating. I needed to hydrate. I needed to get to a doctor. I laid on my back at the edge of my backyard, having saved myself from the animal that chased me through the woods. I passed out. I woke up an instant later. Maybe it was hours. I couldn't tell with the sun. I looked over. Maybe it had all just been a dream. A nightmare, and I had dehydrated on my run. It was a relieving feeling, but after a moment the clouds in my head started to clear. It wasn't a dream. At the edge of the woods it was there, peeking behind a tree, somehow hiding the true size of itself. The animal. It was dangling a shredded running shoe in one of its hands. My running shoe. I heard a slow crunching sound. A steady chewing. The animal was still chewing on my bones. It began to speak again, except its voice had changed to the voice of my mother. Alex. Alilix, wake up, sweetheart. It's time to go outside and play. Go off and play in the woods. Don't you want to come back, honey? Do come back. Maybe tomorrow, yes? Get your 5 miles in. Get your 10 miles in? I'll see you then, dear. I will see you then. I never could figure out what made the animal stop, how it wasn't able to move past the wood line, or even how I knew I would be safe if I made it back to my backyard. Was it really under my bed as a child? The cottage. Mother. I didn't understand. I crawled back to my house. The bleeding had slowed, but the bandages were soaked through with my blood. I was really lightheaded. I thought I was going to pass out again when I had to push the sliding glass door open. I managed to make a phone call before passing out again. The doctors didn't know what to think. I told them it was a gator that got me. No one would have believed anything else. No one questioned me further with that information either. People rarely show up at an ER with a leg bitten off. No doctor would have the experience to really question my story, anyways. I have never gone back in the woods. Never even thought about it. I could never go back. Sometimes, if I wake up before the sun rises, I'll be drinking my coffee and right when the sun hits the tree line, I'll see it. The animal, peeking out behind a tree. Never the same tree. What is left of my leg will always ache, and I'll feel the sensation of being lowered into the animal's mouth, again. And the tip of my leg feels that fire. The tip of my stump. Once the twilight of morning is past, the animal will duck behind whatever it's hiding behind and disappear. It never speaks. It never does anything else but look at me. I never see the animal's teeth, but I don't ever have to.